Welcome to your storytelling. Enjoy the stories and don't forget to subscribe. For years, I trusted my husband. I thought we had a solid marriage. He was always there when I needed him, and we had our little routines. But it all started to unravel when he began complaining about our next-door neighbor. He would mutter how annoying she was, how she was always in his business, and how she drove him crazy. I didn't think much of it at first. After all, I knew she was a little eccentric. But over time, his complaints grew louder. What bothered me wasn't just his constant grumbling. It was how he always seemed so uneasy after talking to her. It was as if there was something he wasn't telling me. Little did I know, the woman he claimed to despise was actually someone he couldn't stop thinking about. A feeling I hadn't been able to shake off, but ignored, had been growing. He'd always be out late, but it was only after I started paying attention that I realized something wasn't quite right. Something was off. At first, I thought it was just a series of coincidences. Maybe it was just me being paranoid. My husband would return home late some nights, and I'd ask him where he had been, thinking it was just work or a casual hangout with friends. But his answers always felt rehearsed. Just had to stay late at the office, he'd say, or caught up with a buddy for drinks. It didn't add up. I began noticing patterns. The same time, the same excuses. It wasn't just once or twice. It was frequent, almost too frequent. I tried to ignore the sinking feeling in my stomach every time he returned home smelling like something that wasn't his cologne. A part of me wanted to confront him right then and there, but another part of me wasn't ready to hear the truth. I wasn't sure if I could handle it. I convinced myself I was being irrational. He loved me, right? We had a baby on the way. Things were fine. But deep down, I felt a nagging suspicion. And then one night, everything changed. It was 2 a.m. when I saw his car parked outside her house. My heart stopped. There it was, right in front of me. I couldn't believe my eyes. There was no reason for him to be there at that hour, especially not in the middle of the night. He had told me he was working late. Yet here he was, parked outside her home. I stood frozen by the window, my breath shallow, watching. My mind raced with questions. What was he doing there? Why didn't he tell me? Could he be cheating? I wanted to scream, to confront him right there, but I knew I couldn't. Not yet. I told myself it was a coincidence, that maybe he was just helping her with something, maybe they were talking about neighborhood stuff. But even I knew that was a lie. The longer I watched, the harder it became to pretend this wasn't happening. I couldn't unsee what I had just witnessed, and I wasn't sure what to do next. My husband, my partner, was lying to me. I had to know more. The next day, I acted like everything was normal, but I couldn't shake the image of his car parked outside her house in the dead of night. I kept replaying the scene in my head, each moment feeling like a crushing weight on my chest. What had he been doing there? And why didn't he tell me? I tried to talk myself out of it, telling myself it was nothing, that I was overreacting. But deep inside, I knew. I could feel it. The trust we once had was slowly eroding, and I wasn't sure how much more I could take. When he came home later that evening, I tried to act casual, but I couldn't hide the tension in the air. I asked him, with as much calm as I could muster, "Where were you last night?" "I saw your car outside her house." He brushed it off with a laugh, telling me I was imagining things. "You're crazy, babe. I was just out with some coworkers, nothing more." But his voice didn't sound convincing. It was strained, nervous. I could tell he was hiding something, and I hated it. His eyes avoided mine, and that was all the confirmation I needed. He was lying. As the days went on, I couldn't stop thinking about that night. His lies weighed on me, and every time he walked out the door, I was filled with dread. Where was he really going? Was it just work, or was he meeting her? I couldn't help myself. I started to watch him more closely. It was like a puzzle I couldn't stop piecing together. Every time he left, I felt my heart race. Every excuse seemed a little too rehearsed. Every smile seemed a little too forced. He wasn't just hiding something. He was avoiding me, avoiding the truth. One evening, I couldn't take it anymore. I needed answers. So, I did something I never thought I'd do. I followed him. I stayed hidden, making sure he didn't see me. It was insane, but I had to know what he was really doing. I watched as he drove to her house again, parking right in front of her door. The moment I saw that, My world started to crumble. He didn't even look back. He went inside without a second thought, like it was normal. I stood there, shocked and broken, and I felt as if my entire life had been built on a lie. The next few days felt like a blur. I went through the motions of daily life, but my mind was consumed by the image of him walking into her house, without hesitation, without remorse. Every smile he gave me seemed fake, and every word that came out of his mouth felt like a well-rehearsed performance. I could barely look at him without feeling a pang of betrayal. He had no idea what I had seen, but I couldn't shake the feeling that he knew, on some level, that I was suspicious. The tension between us grew, yet I kept pretending everything was fine. I kept pretending I didn't know what was going on. But inside, I was a mess. My heart ached every time he left the house. My thoughts spiraled with doubt, with anger, with confusion. Why hadn't he been honest with me? What did she have that I didn't? He didn't even care enough to hide it. I could feel it in the air. And yet, I couldn't bring myself to confront him. I wasn't ready to face the truth, because I was terrified of what I might find. I had become consumed with the need to know the truth. Every little thing he did or said felt like a clue, a piece of the puzzle I was desperately trying to put together. But I was stuck in this endless loop of doubt. The more I questioned him, the more his answers seemed rehearsed, like he was saying what he thought I wanted to hear. I had never felt so alone in my life. I tried to tell myself that maybe I was just being paranoid, but deep down, I knew this wasn't just my imagination. Something was happening between them, something he was hiding. I spent nights lying awake, wondering when it all began. Was it last week? Last month? Longer? How long had he been keeping secrets from me? I couldn't remember a time when I felt more isolated, when my mind was so clouded with suspicion. The love I thought we shared now felt like a distant memory, replaced by a growing emptiness inside me. One evening, I was cleaning up the kitchen when I heard voices in the driveway. My heart skipped a beat. It was them, him and her. I had heard their conversations before, but this time, it felt different. Their voices were louder, more intense, as though they were arguing. Or were they? As I listened, I realized they weren't arguing at all. They were talking in that familiar, too comfortable way, like they had done this many times before. I stood there, frozen, unable to look away. I couldn't believe it. They weren't just talking. They were sharing something. A connection. A bond one hadn't even known existed. Every word they said sent waves of betrayal crashing through me. I had always thought their relationship was superficial, just neighborly. But this was something else. Something deeper. And I was no longer sure how much of what he told me was real. I watched them from the window, barely able to breathe. The way they interacted, so familiar, so easy, made my blood boil. The way he looked at her, the way she touched his arm, laughing at something he said. I wanted to scream, to shout, to run outside and demand the truth from both of them. But instead, I stayed silent, watching through the blinds. A part of me wanted to believe I was imagining it, that it wasn't as bad as it seemed. But deep down, I knew better. This wasn't just innocent neighborly conversation. This was something that had been building up for a long time, something they couldn't hide anymore. They were having a secret that was tearing me apart. I watched as they said their goodbyes, and my husband kissed her on the cheek before driving off. My heart shattered into a million pieces. He was lying to me. And worse, he didn't even care enough to hide it anymore. The next morning, I asked him again. In the calmest voice I could muster, "What were you doing last night?" "I saw you with her." This time, he didn't laugh it off. He didn't brush it off with a joke. He just stood there, silent, looking at me with a mixture of guilt and frustration. "You're overreacting," he said, but there was no conviction in his voice. I could tell he was stalling, trying to come up with a lie that would make everything go away. But I wasn't buying it anymore. "I'm not overreacting," I said, my voice shaking. "I saw you. You can't keep lying to me." The silence that followed was deafening. For a moment, I thought he might actually tell me the truth, but instead, he just walked away. He didn't say another word. The knot in my stomach tightened as I realized just how far gone we were. I wasn't sure how much more of this I could take. I needed answers, and I needed them now. The days following that conversation were some of the most suffocating of my life. The weight of his silence was unbearable. It was as if we were living in two completely different worlds. He continued with his usual routine, coming and going as if nothing had changed, as if I hadn't caught him in the middle of a lie. But I couldn't shake the feeling that he knew I was onto him. Every time our eyes met, there was this unspoken tension between us. It felt like a lie that was too big to ignore, too deep to hide. He was walking on eggshells around me, and I could feel it. But I still couldn't bring myself to confront him fully. I wasn't sure if I was ready for the truth, or if I would even be able to handle it. What if everything I thought I knew about our marriage was a lie? I had to know more, but I didn't know if I had the strength to face it. So, I did what any person who felt trapped would do. I kept watching. I couldn't stop myself. I watched him closely over the next few days, noticing the small things. The way he would glance at his phone and quickly hide it when I walked by. The way he seemed to hurry out the door, as if he was avoiding something. My suspicions only deepened with every passing moment. He wasn't just hiding something. He was hiding everything. And then, one afternoon, I caught him. He didn't see me as I stood in the hallway, but I saw it all. He was texting her, his fingers moving quickly as he typed something on his phone. I couldn't make out the words, but I didn't need to. I saw the look on his face as he read her messages. It wasn't just a friendly exchange. It was intimate. The way he smiled at the screen, the way his eyes softened. It was the same look he used to give me when we first met. And that's when I knew. He was in too deep, and I wasn't just watching a marriage fall apart. I was watching him fall in love with someone else. It took everything I had not to burst into the room and confront him then and there. But I knew I needed to stay calm, to gather my thoughts before I said anything. I needed proof, not just suspicion. So, I waited. That night, when he went out for his usual work excuse, I grabbed his phone. He had been so careless with it lately, leaving it unlocked. I scrolled through his messages and found exactly what I was looking for. There it was, a long conversation between him and her, full of inside jokes and affection. They were meeting up more often than I ever knew. My heart sank deeper with every word I read. There were no boundaries, no excuses, just raw, unfiltered desire. I felt betrayed, humiliated, and heartbroken all at once. The man I had married, the father of our child, was having an affair with our next-door neighbor. And all these years, I had been the one left in the dark, left to believe his lies. I couldn't keep pretending. I couldn't keep smiling through the pain, acting like everything was fine. I had to confront him. I had to know why. I waited for him to come home, my hands trembling with the phone in my grip. When he walked through the door, I stood there, silent, watching him, waiting for him to notice something was wrong. He tried to kiss me, but I pulled away. The moment I did, his eyes widened in confusion, and then dread. "What's wrong?" he asked, trying to act normal, but I could see the panic in his eyes. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I held up his phone and showed him the messages. His face drained of color, and in that moment, I saw the truth in his eyes. He couldn't lie his way out of this one. "Why?" I whispered, my voice breaking. "Why her? Why not me?" He didn't respond immediately, and that silence spoke volumes. The guilt was written all over his face. He opened his mouth to speak, but nothing came out. It wasn't the words I needed to hear. I didn't need him to apologize or make excuses. I just needed the truth. "I'm sorry," he finally said, his voice hollow. "I never meant for it to happen, but it did. I don't know how to fix this." His words didn't comfort me. They just confirmed everything I already knew. He had been lying to me for months, maybe even longer. He had been lying about everything, and I was just the one left behind, holding on to a marriage that no longer existed. My heart ached for what we had lost, for the love that had faded away without me even realizing it. And even though he said he was sorry, I knew that nothing could ever erase the pain he had caused. I didn't know what to do after that. The room felt suffocating, and I couldn't look at him the same way anymore. Everything had changed, and I didn't know how to go back. For the first time in years, I didn't recognize the man standing in front of me. He was a stranger now, someone who had betrayed me in ways I never imagined. I wanted to scream, to demand he leave, but instead, I found myself sitting down, completely numb. "How long has this been going on?" I asked, barely able to speak through the lump in my throat. He looked away, unable to meet my gaze. "I don't know," he admitted quietly. "A few months, I guess. I didn't mean to hurt you. I really didn't." But his words were empty, hollow. There was no sincerity behind them. How could there be? How could I trust anything he said anymore? I had been living in a lie, and now, everything we had was shattered. The future we had built together, it no longer existed. And I wasn't sure if I could ever rebuild from this. The silence that followed his confession was unbearable. I sat there, trying to process what he had just admitted, but my mind was racing in 100 different directions. The betrayal, the hurt, the shock. It all hit me at once. How could he have done this to me? How could he have torn apart everything we had, everything I had believed in? I had given him my trust, my love, and he had thrown it all away for something so meaningless. I wanted to scream, to demand answers, to make him feel the pain he had caused. But instead, I found myself frozen, unable to move or speak. He had betrayed me in the worst way possible, and yet, here he was, apologizing as if that would make everything better. I didn't know if I could forgive him, if I even wanted to. I wasn't sure where to go from here. But I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't keep pretending everything was fine. My world had been shattered, and I had to find a way to rebuild it, piece by piece. The days after his confession were a blur of emotional turmoil. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, couldn't focus on anything other than the pain he had caused. I kept replaying the moments in my mind. His lies, his betrayal, the way he had looked at her when he thought I wasn't watching. Every memory seemed tainted now, twisted by the realization that everything I had known about our marriage was a lie. I started questioning everything, every word, every gesture, every look he had ever given me. Was any of it real? Or had it all been just a performance, a mask he wore to hide his true intentions? I found myself growing more and more distant from him, unable to be near him without feeling the weight of his betrayal. I couldn't look at him without seeing her, without feeling the sting of his lies. I had always thought our marriage was strong, that we were invincible, but now it felt fragile, broken, irreparably damaged. One night, I couldn't take it anymore. The emotional weight of everything was suffocating me, and I found myself standing in front of our bedroom mirror, staring at my reflection. I hardly recognized the woman looking back at me, the woman who had once believed in love, in loyalty, in a future with the man she had married. Now, all I saw was a shell of who I used to be, a woman betrayed, a woman broken by the man she trusted the most. I didn't know who I was anymore, or what I was supposed to do next. The life I had built had been ripped apart, and I was left to pick up the pieces. I could feel the anger bubbling up inside me, but I wasn't sure where to direct it. I couldn't change what had happened. I couldn't undo the hurt he had caused. But maybe, just maybe, I could find a way to heal, to move forward, even if it meant leaving him behind. But that wasn't something I was ready to face yet. Not yet. The following week, I began to take small steps toward figuring out what my life would look like without him. It wasn't easy. Every decision, every moment, felt like an impossible choice. Should I stay and try to rebuild our broken marriage? Or should I leave, cut ties with him completely, and start over? I didn't have all the answers, but one thing was becoming clear. I couldn't stay in this toxic situation. The trust was gone, and without that, there was nothing left. I started focusing more on myself, on finding the strength to move forward. I spent time with friends, I went to therapy, I did things for me, even if they were small. Each day, I felt a little bit stronger, a little bit more like the woman I had been before everything fell apart. It wasn't easy, and there were moments when I thought about him, about what we had, but those moments were fewer now. Slowly, I was beginning to realize that I deserved more. I deserved honesty. I deserved loyalty. I deserved someone who would never betray me. As the weeks passed, the emotional distance between my husband and me grew. He kept apologizing, kept begging me to give him another chance, but I couldn't bring myself to believe him. His words felt empty now, hollow promises that meant nothing after everything he had done. I wasn't sure what I was waiting for, whether it was a sign, an apology that was truly sincere, or just the strength to let go. But one evening, it all became clear. I was sitting in the living room, sorting through some old photo albums when I stumbled upon a picture of us on our wedding day. I hadn't looked at it in years, but when I saw it, something inside me snapped. That woman in the photo wasn't the same person I was now. She was hopeful, full of love, unaware of the betrayal that was coming. The woman I had become had lost her innocence, her trust, her belief in the man she loved. And in that moment, I knew I couldn't go back. I couldn't pretend to be that person again. He had taken that from me. I had to let go. For my own sake, for my own healing. I couldn't keep holding on to a past that no longer existed. The hardest part wasn't making the decision to leave. It was actually doing it. I still loved him, in a way, despite everything. There was a part of me that wanted to fix things, to make it work, to forgive him. But the reality was that our relationship had been shattered beyond repair. I couldn't live in this constant state of betrayal and hurt. It was killing me, little by little. So, I packed my bags. I didn't tell him until the very last moment, when it was too late for him to stop me. I needed to do this for myself, to reclaim my life, my dignity, my peace of mind. When I told him I was leaving, his face crumpled in disbelief. He begged me to stay, to give him another chance. But the tears I shed were for me, for the woman I used to be, for the love I thought we had. And in that moment, I realized, letting go was the only way I could heal. Letting go was the only way I could move forward. The night I left was one of the hardest moments of my life. I had no idea where I was going, just that I couldn't stay. I packed a few bags, grabbed my keys, and walked out the door without looking back. The silence of the house felt suffocating, like a tomb. It was hard to breathe in that space, to feel the weight of everything we had built collapsing around me. But I had to leave. I had to escape the suffocating grip of a man who had broken my heart and shattered my trust. As I drove away, I didn't feel free. I felt numb, like I was floating in some in-between space where nothing made sense anymore. All I could think about was the life I was leaving behind, and whether I had made the right choice. What if I was making a mistake? What if there was a way to fix everything? But deep down, I knew there wasn't. I couldn't fix him, and I couldn't fix us. It was over, and I had to face that reality. The days after I left felt like a blur. I stayed with a close friend for a while, trying to process everything that had happened. It was strange, being away from him. I had lived in that house for so long, had been married to him for so many years. And now, suddenly, everything had changed. I wasn't sure who I was without him. I had spent so much time being his wife, taking care of our home, our family. I didn't know what it was like to just be me anymore. But I was starting to figure it out. Slowly, I began to rediscover parts of myself I had forgotten. I went for walks, started reading again, spent time doing things I enjoyed. And through it all, I realized something. I was stronger than I thought. I had survived a betrayal I never imagined, and I was still standing. I wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like I had control over my own life. But even as I tried to heal, there were moments when the pain still crept up on me. I would wake up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, heart pounding in my chest. The memories would flood back. His lies, his betrayal, the way he had looked at her with that same love that should have been mine. I would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if I would ever truly heal. I didn't want to keep thinking about him, about what he had done, but I couldn't help it. The hurt was still fresh, still raw. And no matter how much I tried to move on, a part of me still wanted him back. I still missed him, even after everything. I couldn't help but wonder, did he miss me too? Was he regretting what he had done? Or was he already moving on with her? It was hard not to feel insignificant in those moments, like I was the one left behind, the one forgotten. But I knew I had to keep moving forward. For myself. For my future. It wasn't until a few weeks later that I got a call from him. I wasn't expecting it, hadn't even thought about the possibility that he would reach out. But when my phone rang and his name appeared on the screen, I couldn't ignore it. My heart stopped in my chest. I didn't know what to expect. Would he beg for forgiveness? Would he apologize again? even though the words felt meaningless? Or was he just calling to finalize everything, to make it official that we were done for good? I let the phone ring a few more times before finally answering. "Hello?" I said, my voice shaky, uncertain. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Then, finally, his voice broke through. "I miss you," he said. "I've made a huge mistake, and I don't know how to fix it, but I want to try. Please, just let me explain." I listened to his words, and for a moment, I felt a wave of emotion hit me. It was everything I had wanted to hear, everything I had been waiting for. But then, I stopped myself. I remembered everything. His betrayal, his lies, the way he had torn me apart. I had no reason to believe him, no reason to think that this time would be any different. He had made his choice, and that choice had been her. He had chosen her over me, over us, and no apology, no explanation, could erase that. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. "You had your chance," I said, my voice calm but firm. "You made your choice, and I'm not going to be part of your mess anymore. I'm done." There was silence on the other end of the line, and I knew he was trying to find the right words to say, but I wasn't interested in hearing them. I had heard enough. The truth was clear now. I had to move on, and this time, there would be no going back. After that call, I didn't hear from him again for a while. At first, I was relieved. It felt like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders, like I had made the right decision. But as time passed, the loneliness began to settle in. I missed the companionship, the comfort of having someone by my side. Even though he had betrayed me in the worst way possible, I couldn't help but long for the life we once shared. I missed the good times, the memories we had made, even though they felt like they belonged to a different version of me. I started to question myself. Was I being too harsh? Was I making a mistake by walking away? I still loved him, in a way, but love wasn't enough. It never had been, and the pain of his betrayal had proven that. I couldn't go back to a life of lies, of deceit. I had to move forward, even if it meant doing it alone. It was around this time that I started to realize something important. I was capable of finding happiness again, even if it meant starting from scratch. I didn't need him to complete me, to make me whole. I was whole on my own. I had spent so many years defining myself through him, through our marriage, that I had forgotten who I really was. But now, I was rediscovering myself, rediscovering the woman I had been before he came into my life. I started doing things for myself, things I had put off for years. I joined a yoga class, began cooking more, spent time with my friends, and even started dating again. Slowly, I began to see the possibilities for my future, and they didn't involve him. They didn't involve the man who had broken my heart. They involved me, and that was enough. One evening, a few months after everything had ended, I was sitting in a cafe, sipping my coffee, when I saw him across the room. My heart skipped a beat, and I couldn't help but stare. He looked different. Happier, maybe. He was sitting with her, laughing, talking, and for the first time, I didn't feel a pang of jealousy, or anger, or sadness. I just felt indifferent. I had spent so much time thinking about him, about what he had done, about what we had lost. But now, I realized, he was no longer a part of my story. He was part of the past, and I had moved on. In that moment, I knew I had made the right decision. I had chosen myself, and that was the most important thing. After seeing him with her, I felt a sense of finality settle in my chest. It was like a chapter of my life had been closed, and I had no desire to reopen it. He had moved on, and in that moment, I realized I had too. I spent so many months consumed by thoughts of him, wondering if he would come back, if we could fix things. But now, it was clear that nothing could change the past. I had grown stronger, more independent, and as I walked out of that cafe, I felt lighter, like a weight had been lifted from my soul. I had finally let go. I had finally allowed myself to heal, and I didn't need him to complete me. I was complete on my own. In the months that followed, I continued to focus on my own growth. I started traveling again, something I had always loved but had put on hold during our marriage. I visited places I had dreamed about, met new people, and experienced life in ways I never had before. I found joy in the simple things: long walks in the park, dinners with friends, quiet moments to myself. I realized that I had been so wrapped up in our marriage that I had forgotten to live for myself. Now, every day felt like a new opportunity to rediscover who I was and what I truly wanted. I had let go of the past, and in doing so, I had made room for a future that was entirely my own. It was terrifying, but it was also exhilarating. I was no longer defined by my past. I was defining my future. One evening, I bumped into an old friend I hadn't seen in years. We caught up over drinks, and as we reminisced about the past, I realized how much I had changed. I had grown in ways I hadn't even noticed. I was no longer the woman who had been so consumed by her husband's lies and betrayal. I was someone new, someone stronger, someone who had learned to value herself. My friend, seeing the transformation, commented on how happy and free I seemed. And for the first time in a long while, I truly felt that way. Free. The weight of my past no longer held me down. It had taken a long time to get to this point, but I was finally living for me. And in that moment, I knew I had made the right decision. But there were still moments when the memories crept in, uninvited. I would be sitting alone, minding my own business, when a memory of him would suddenly resurface. The sound of his laugh, the way he used to hold my hand, the feel of his kiss. It was hard to escape the past entirely. There were still days when I missed him, when I wished things had turned out differently. I had spent so many years with him, and even though he had betrayed me, there was still a part of me that longed for the life we had once shared. But as time passed, those moments became less frequent. I had learned to let them go, to not let them define me. The past was just that, the past, and it no longer had any power over me. I was creating a new future, one where I was in control. As I moved further into this new chapter of my life, I found myself thinking more about what I wanted for my future. I had always put others first, my husband, our marriage, our home. But now, I was learning to put myself first. I started setting new goals for myself, things I had always dreamed of but had never made time for. I enrolled in a writing class, something I had always wanted to do. I began exploring my passion for photography, capturing moments that inspired me. I even thought about going back to school, about pursuing a new career. The possibilities felt endless. I realized that the woman I was now was someone who was not only surviving but thriving. And I was excited about the future. I didn't know exactly where it would take me, but I knew it would be a future where I was the one making the decisions, the one in control of my own happiness. One day, while I was out with friends, I ran into someone unexpected. It was someone I had known years ago, before everything with my husband had started to fall apart. We had lost touch over time, but when our eyes met across the room, something clicked. It was as if the universe had brought us together again. We talked for hours, catching up on everything we had missed in each other's lives. There was a connection there, a spark that I hadn't felt in a long time. It was strange in a way, because I wasn't looking for a relationship. I wasn't looking for anything except peace and independence. But this man, this person who had once been a part of my life, made me realize that love wasn't something I had to force. It could come naturally, when the time was right. And maybe, just maybe, I was ready for it again. We started seeing each other more frequently, and I found myself opening up in ways I hadn't before. He was kind, understanding, and patient. Everything my ex-husband hadn't been. We took things slow, getting to know each other all over again. And as we spent more time together, I realized something. This was different. It wasn't about filling the void left by my ex. It wasn't about replacing the love I had once had. It was about building something new, something that was all our own. I was no longer the woman who had been hurt by betrayal. I was a woman who had healed, who had learned to love herself. And because of that, I was ready to love again. This relationship, though still new, felt like the beginning of something beautiful. As time went on, I found myself becoming more and more excited about the future. The hurt, the pain, the betrayal, all of it was slowly fading into the background. It wasn't gone completely, but it no longer controlled my life. I had let go of the past, and in doing so, I had made room for something better. I started traveling more, reconnecting with old friends, and even considering new career opportunities. The world felt like it was full of possibilities, and I was ready to explore them all. The woman I was now was stronger, wiser, and more independent than the woman I had been before. And as I looked ahead, I felt hopeful. Hopeful for the future, hopeful for new beginnings, and most of all, hopeful for the life I was creating for myself. One evening, while I was out on a walk, I stopped by the place where my husband and I used to go to get coffee. It felt strange being there without him, but I had come to terms with it. The memories of our time together no longer hurt. They just felt like distant echoes of a life I had left behind. As I sat down with my cup of coffee, I realized how far I had come. The woman I was now was no longer defined by my past, no longer held captive by my ex-husband's betrayal. I was free, truly free, for the first time in years. And in that moment, I knew that no matter what the future held, I was ready for it. I was ready to face whatever came next, knowing that I was capable of handling it on my own. Looking back on everything, I can honestly say that I'm grateful for the journey I've been through. The heartbreak, the pain, the betrayal. It all led me to this moment, this version of myself. I am stronger, wiser, and more independent than I ever thought I could be. I have learned to value myself, to put my happiness first, and to never settle for less than I deserve. The road hasn't always been easy, but I've made it through. And now, as I look ahead, I know that whatever comes next will be a reflection of the strength I've gained and the lessons I've learned. I'm no longer the woman who was betrayed by her husband. I'm the woman who overcame it and came out stronger on the other side. And that is something I will always be proud of.